everybody. Welcome to Sunday Sit Down. On this episode, which I already recorded once, but I'm going to record it again because the first time I just started rambling and it was like 20 minutes and it just wasn't that good. I don't know. I want to bring you the best stuff I can. So on this episode, we are going to talk about something that has been a part of my life for like five or 6 years now, and that is steroids. Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to pump you up. So basically with steroids, I got started not with steroids, but learning about steroids and being quote-unquote involved, even though that sounds really sketchy, when I was in college, because I worked at a supplement store while I was in college. I was also into lifting weights, and I went to a D2 school where there was a lot of like fellow meatheads, and then that school was located next to a military base. So between those three factors, I was just getting questions about steroids a lot, because for some reason people feel really comfortable asking the local supplement guy, even if he's like 20 like I was, like questions about steroids, which is really odd if you think about it. Like, why does this guy that makes $8 an hour, why would he know anything about these really powerful chemicals? So anyway, this Sunday I want to start, this is going to be part one of Sunday Sit Down, and we're going to talk about steroids. And if I have to say it, I shouldn't, but I will. Don't do anything illegal, don't break the law, don't take drugs that are prescribed to you, blah, 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 blah. Don't do those things. This is for entertainment purposes only. So, as far as steroids are concerned, what are they? Where did they come from? Well, steroids are a lot of different things, but we're talking about specifically anabolic steroids. And anabolic steroids, the word anabolic means to build, I believe. And so an anabolic steroid is something that it's a hormone, it's a chemical that basically your body, without getting too deep into it, your body takes that chemical and uses, it's a signal, and what your body gets from that signal is build muscle, build muscle. And so when you take a steroid, your body is getting the signal, a very powerful signal, to build muscle, build, 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 grow, 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 grow. And it's actually much more complicated than that, but we'll just, for the purposes of this 10-minute video, we'll say that's what it is. Where did steroids come from as far as anabolic steroids? So anabolic steroids were actually mostly all developed in the mid-1900s. So like, let's say roughly 1950 to 1970, around that time. And the reason that anabolic steroids were originally invented was actually for the Olympics. Basically, we had the United States, we had Russia, we had a few other countries, first world countries, that had the money to pay scientists and research labs to develop these, hormones to make their athletes better, because at the time steroids didn't exist, so they weren't banned in the Olympics. So it was a logical thing for us to make these chemicals that made our athletes better, and our nation would win more gold medals and we'd have more bragging rights and whatever else. So that's where steroids came from, and basically all the steroids, because there's a bunch of different steroids, if you didn't know, there's hundreds of different steroids that were invented in that time period, that 10 to 15, 20 years where all these scientists were working on making these athletes better. And there's books, there's giant thick books full of different compounds, some of which you've probably heard of if you're into it, some of which you probably haven't heard of. And that's kind of the origin of steroids. So that was in, like I said, mid-1900s. And then in the, let's say, late 70s to late 80s, they became really, really popular for bodybuilding and fitness purposes. Men, women, and everything in between were using these anabolic steroids, not for athletic purposes, but for bodybuilding. And, that's where basically all professional bodybuilders came from, was a combination of hard work, nutrition, and anabolic steroids. That's how you ended up with these 260-pound freaks that we have now. And so that all happened in between the 1950s and the 1990s. Steroids were invented, and then they became popular in fitness. So then in the early 1990s, when George Bush Sr. was the president, really for no other purpose than just to look good and make all the parents think that he was looking out for their children, he signed into law the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 1992. I believe it was 1992. And basically what that did is that banned not all steroids, period, just specific compounds. So really popular ones like testosterone, dianabol, decadurable, and nandrolone, and a bunch of other really popular ones. And that was in, like I said, early 1990s. And that was the first of many anabolic steroid control acts. And the reason that there's been more than one is because when George Bush Sr. did that, He didn't, if he was trying to make all anabolic steroids illegal, he didn't do a very good job, because then in the mid-90s and all the way up through 2014, supplement companies, the same people that make your protein powder and creatine and vitamins, started coming out with what was called prohormones. And that's what you heard Mark McGwire was taking and a bunch of other baseball stars. And so in the mid-90s through the really late 2000s up to 2014, supplement companies were coming out with these things called prohormones, which were supposedly not as bad as steroids. And let me clarify something about this, because I got this question a lot in college. What a prohormone is, and what it started as in the 1990s when these companies started making these products and selling them over the counter, was essentially, for 10-minute videos purposes, a prohormone is a deactivated steroid. So in the bottle on the shelf that you can buy, used to be able to buy at your supplement store, was a quote-unquote deactivated steroid, and then when you would swallow that pill, it would go through a metabolic process, and some percentage of it, usually a very small percentage, would get metabolic, basically it would activate, for lack of a better term, a small percentage of this deactive steroid would activate. So it was sort of ish legal, because the supplement companies weren't selling you a steroid, they were selling you an inactive steroid, and it only became a steroid in your body. And so basically the government for the past 20 years has been chasing these supplement companies who every time the government comes out with a new anabolic steroid control act and puts whatever substance is being sold on the list, and the supplement company can no longer make it, that supplement company basically would just go back to the books that we wrote in the 1950s and pick out a compound and be like, well, this one isn't technically on the books yet, we'll make this one. And so that's been this cat and mouse game that's been going on for basically 20 years at this point. And so when people talk about steroids and prohormones, that's kind of the general difference. But an important distinction to make about prohormones, especially since the year 2000, 2002, is that what was being sold as prohormones over the counter, it got really deceptive, because it got to the point where all the compounds that the supplement companies had been using that were, these deactivated steroids, and I won't get too much into the science of it, basically they were either running out of them, or they just wanted to make something that was more powerful so they could sell more of it. I don't remember exactly which was the motivator, but since about 2000, 2002, these products, a lot of them that were being sold as prohormones, were actually just oral steroids. They were straight up pill-based steroids, just as powerful as anything that you would get on the black market. And you might be wondering, well, how did they get away with it? Well, they did and they didn't. So basically the way that the supplement companies justified it was just like the prohormones. These compounds never made it onto any of the steroid control acts that the government had issued. So in a way, they were kind of getting away with it. But here's the messed up part. You were able to buy these things over the counter with in the same order. You could have vitamin A, 5 pounds of protein powder, and some of the most powerful oral steroids known to man. And you really wouldn't have any idea unless you knew what the ingredients were. And this happened to a lot of friends of mine, is they would actually just buy this, some product called Muscle Builder 5000. And then they would text me 2 weeks later after they started taking it and be like, yeah, dude, check this stuff out. I put on, 10 pounds of muscle and my bench has gone up 80 pounds. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you're taking a steroid. And so I think on the next Sunday Sit Down, we're going to talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of it, and some of the myths and some of the truths of it. But I do want to clarify one thing. I actually have never taken steroids, and the only reason I haven't, I have no moral issue with it at all. The only reason I haven't taken steroids is it's really expensive to do it right, because usually you're going to use a combination of oral steroids and injectable steroids, and then you've got other considerations things that you need to take to stay healthy and to be healthy when you get off the steroids. Secondly is I'm 230 pounds. I'm no drugs at all. And so if I were to take steroids, I could easily be 250, 260, 270 if I put in, the time and the nutrition and the work. That's not good for your heart. Your heart doesn't like to be heavy. It's like, no, take weight off. I don't like this. I'm working too hard. And I don't need to live any shorter of a life than I'm probably already going to live. So I have no moral issue with it at all. But basically, I studied it. The reason I know about it and the reason I can talk about it is because for the past 5 or 6 years, I studied it religiously. Like, I just really got into the science of it, and it's been a while since I've been into it, but I got into it because all my friends in college were doing it, were either taking them, you know, illegally, or they were buying the quote-unquote legal ones over the counter. And so I was like, well, I think one of us, out of, like, you know, all these people that I knew, one of us should, like, try to know what he's talking about. And so really it wasn't from any other point other than I just wanted my friends to be as safe as possible. So when I was like 20, 21, I started like really getting onto these like forums and message boards and literally like steroid dictionaries. Like I would started reading like scientific journals on steroids just so I could sort of know what I was talking about. But anyway, that's kind of where steroids come from, and that's the difference between like prohormones and steroids, even though there really is no difference. And yeah, I think I jumped around a little bit, but I hope it's been somewhat helpful. And if you have any questions at all, leave them in the comments below. Again, this was for entertainment purposes only. But yeah, stay tuned for part 2. I promise it'll be a little more organized maybe. And thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out, and don't do drugs. Bye.